Hello everyone, and welcome to this professional development session on creating effective evaluations with Google Forms. Now this session is going to be broken down into a couple different parts, but at the end of this video I'm going to describe how to complete the activity that is detailed in this form. In the first part of this video, we're going to talk about how to configure a Google Forms as an evaluation. Then we're going to look at two different add-ons that can help both with time management, but also to help mitigate cheating. And finally, we're going to look at how to grade one of these evaluations, and then how to migrate those grades to Google Classroom. Now, before we start working with the configuration of a Google form, I wanted to show you some resources that I have in this form. The first one, this link, will send you to my YouTube channel where I have a tutorial where I go far more in depth into each of the things that we're going to be talking about today. I also have another link here that will send you to a folder where I have many examples of different types of assessments that you can use in your class, and you have view permission, which means that you can make a copy of any one of these forms. In addition to that, the form that we're going to be working with today is in this folder. So the form that we're going to be working on the configuration of, and where I'm going to show the different tools of, and the one that we're going to grade is right here. And so if you wanted to make a copy of this, you can, or if you want to go there to use it as a reference at any point, it is available to you through this link. So to start with the configuration of a Google form, we're going to use this form, like I said, that is inside that folder that you have access to. So I've called this Final Exam, and we're going to talk about the add-ons in a little bit. But when we are setting this up, the first thing that we want to do with any of our forms is go to Settings. So if I click on this little wheel up here, there are a couple settings that I want if I'm setting this form up as an evaluation. The first thing I want to make sure that I have is that it's collecting email addresses. Now, one of the add-ons will do this automatically, but I want to make sure that I'm doing this because if I'm collecting email addresses, that means that they're going to be required to sign into Google. And so 3 settings that I always check when I'm doing these evaluations is collect email addresses, restrict to users in St. Anne's School, which means if you do not have a St. Anne's School email account, you're not going to be able to access this form. And then I limit to 1 response. The next thing that I like to do is check these 2, show progress bar and shuffle question order. That ensures that every student that comes to do this is going to have questions in a different order. And so if they were to try to cheat or send messages to each other about a particular question, it's going to make it more difficult because number 4 for one student is not going to be the same number 4 for another student. In addition to that, the progress bar, if I have multiple sections, which I'm going to show you in a little bit, but if I have multiple sections to my quiz, this will let students know what page they are on or what section they are on of that quiz. And finally, if I go to quizzes, I want to make sure that I make this a quiz. And when I check this, what that's going to do is allow me to assign point values for particular questions, which I'm going to show you in a little bit. Then down here, you can release the grade immediately after each submission, but I would only do that if the questions that you have are all questions that can be graded automatically by Google. If you have other types of questions, again, which I'm going to describe in a little bit, if you have other types of questions, then you should have this option selected later after manual review, which means that whether they do this form from the link directly or whether they do this through the add-on Timify Me, either way, it's not going to give them their grade until you release those grades. And this is necessary if you have question types that are not automatically graded. Checkbox and short answer and paragraph as examples of that. And then finally, I put here, respondent can see missed questions, correct answers, point values. Now I have all of these checked, but I have all of them checked because I'm doing later after manual review. If you're doing immediately after each submission, you may not want to do all of these because students are going to get done at different times, and once they are done, they could message each other with whatever the correct answers were to a particular problem. So I've selected all of these because I want students to be able to see that, but they're not going to be able to see this until I release their grades. So once I have these options selected, I press Save. So now our form is configured at a basic level. Now we need to set up our different questions. So you can see that at the top of the form it says it is automatically collecting email addresses for St. Anne's users. Therefore, my first question where I have it as the student's name isn't necessary. I do that for my own purposes because I like how it organizes it afterwards. However, one thing you'll notice is that I have a couple different sections. I have section 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I did that in here to show you different question types, but this is also one way to help with cheating, because this will break up different question groups throughout your quiz. So that means that students aren't necessarily going to be on the same part of the quiz at the same time. The way that I do that is with this last button over here on the right. If I press Add Section, I'm going to have multiple sections to my quiz. So you can see that in my evaluation, I only have one question in section 1, and that's where they put their name. Now the reason why I only have one question here is because I have Shuffle Question Order as an option, if you remember that from the basic configuration. And so if I were to have a lot of questions in section 1, where they put their name is going to be in a completely random place. So that's why I just had this question for section 1. Then students will be asked to go to section 2. Now, I ordered this to show you guys different question types that are available, but I have automatically graded questions for section 2. Section 3 is manually / automatically graded questions, and then section 4 is purely manually graded questions. So in this first section for automatically graded questions, I have 4 different types here. I have multiple choice, I have checkbox grid, multiple choice grid, and checkbox. Now, to get each of these different question types, I just press on the plus sign here, and that'll add a question type. And when I'm adding a question type, I can choose the options I was just telling you about before. So I have multiple choice here, checkbox, I have multiple choice grid, and I have checkbox grid. And those are generally the ones that I end up using. Now in this tutorial, I'm going to be going through the next steps of creating and configuring questions very quickly, because I've already done this in depth in a different tutorial that is on my channel. If you want further instruction or you want a better description, go to my YouTube channel and watch that tutorial, because I go through each of these question types in depth. However, in the interest of saving time for this video, I'm going to skim through it in this tutorial. So you'll notice for the first question, this is a multiple choice question, in this case a math question. And if I click on the question at the bottom, because I configured this as a quiz, you'll notice that I have this answer key button. If I click on that, once I've added my information, I've added my question, I've added my options, I can select which one of these answers is the correct answer, and I can choose the point value. So in this case, I chose it's worth 1 point, and this is the correct answer. Then Google will know how to grade this once it's been submitted, and they can put whether that is correct or incorrect depending on what the student selects. You'll also notice that I have this button down here that says Add Answer Feedback. If I click on that, I can put something that students will receive if they put the incorrect answer or if they put the correct answer. Now, you may not always need to do this on an evaluation, but in forms and classes for regular types of assessments, it can be a useful tool for students to help them learn after an assessment. In addition to that, I can add, for correct or incorrect answers, a link with information or a video to help explain a particular concept more in depth for them. So that is one type of automatically graded question. The other types that Google has are drop-down lists, which I actually don't have here, but I also put here checkbox grid, multiple choice grid, and checkbox. Now, multiple choice grid works the same as a normal multiple choice question. It's just that Google will grade each of these rows. Each of the rows is its own question. And so in this case, I had the name of a couple of battles in World War I, and students had to select the correct dates. But it's graded in the same way that a multiple choice is graded. So if I were to click on this, you can see which answers I've selected are the correct answers and what the point values of each were. However, checkbox is a little different in that for this one, for example, where I asked about books written by William Shakespeare, there are 2 correct answers here, but Google cannot differentiate whether students got one of those correct or if they got both of them correct. In order to get the 2 points that I put here, students need to select both of these in order for them to get that correct. So if they just selected this one, Google's not going to put that they got 1 out of 2, it's going to put 0 out of 2. And that's another reason why I did manual review. Because at the end of the quiz, when you are grading it, if you see that they got one of them right and Google gave them a 0, if I put this as worth 2 points, I could change that to being worth 1 to reflect that they got it half right. So that is the main difference between checkbox and multiple choice. Now the next section I have is manually / automatically graded questions. Technically, Google can grade short answer questions, but the problem is that the answer needs to be exact. So for this question, I put the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci is on display in which Paris museum? You can see for the correct answers, I put 4 different options for what students might put. And so if the students put one of these options down here, then Google will award them the point. The problem is that if they were to have a spelling mistake, or they were to write something in lowercase that should have been uppercase, they're not going to get the point. It needs to be exact. So it's a little bit dangerous to do with the short answers here. But again, when you're going to manually grade it, you can decide to give them the point if they were close enough, if you're grading it after the fact. But short answers can also be something that is purely manually graded, where it may be worth 3 points, but there is no correct answer, and that's something that you need to manually grade afterwards. And then lastly, at the end of the quiz, you'll notice that it says thank you for your hard work. I just like adding that at the end of these types of assessments, but all I did to do that was press this button that says add title and description. And when I add that there, I can just put this here, and then when students do the quiz, which you'll see in a little bit, it will just say thanks for the hard work at the end of the quiz. And do not worry about this last field because that has to do with an add-on, which I'm going to describe next. As for add-ons, if you look in the upper right-hand side of my Google form, there's this little puzzle piece. And if I click on that, there are 4 different add-ons that I have domain added for everybody in the school. So if you click on this button, they should already be here. Now these first 2 I've talked about in another tutorial. I'm not going to be talking about them in this video. But the last 2, Form Limiter and Timify Me, are 2 add-ons that are very useful for effective time management for your evaluation. The first one we're going to talk about is Form Limiter. So if I click on this and I press Set Limit, this is going to allow me to select a date and a time when my form will stop accepting responses. And once that time is passed, regardless of whether a student is halfway through one of your evaluations, their form will not be accepted and their answers will be thrown out. So this sets a hard limit for when forms are no longer going to be accepted. So let's say that I select that this is going to be on Sunday at 5 p.m. Now if I press Save and Enable, on Sunday at 5 p.m., this form will stop accepting responses. Now this is something that you can already do. If you press on Responses for any one of your forms, you'll see right here it says Accepting Responses. If you press on this button, then that also will shut down responses. So this is something that you can do on your own. It's just that Form Limiter is a way to set that up so that it happens automatically. The next add-on that we're going to talk about is Timify Me. Now, Timify Me is a little bit different than Form Limiter in that it gives your students a very specific period of time in which to complete their form. Now, you'll notice that I already have this add-on enabled for this form. But when you put this up here, you're going to have to configure it, and then you're going to have to click this to say add-on enabled, and you want to make sure that it says that. Once this has been enabled, I need to go to a different website to manage my tests that I'm using Timify Me on. So the website that I need to go to is timify.me/app. And if I go here, anytime that I enable one of these forms, whatever form it might be, once I've enabled the add-on, in Timify Me, you'll notice that it'll appear over here. So this is Final Exam, and then I have another one I was testing out called Assessment. But whenever I enable that add-on on one of my forms, that form will appear here in a list. Once I've selected the form that I want to use Timify Me for, I need to press Create Tests here. And when I do that, I can put the respondents that I want to add to this form. In this case, for the activity that you're going to do, you're going to add yourself and you're going to add my account. So you can see that I added my school email account here. And if you were doing this as an evaluation for students, you'd want to add all of their emails here, separated by commas, so that they're recognized as separate emails. The next section says timer duration. Now I set this for 30 minutes, but that is the amount of time the students are going to be given to complete this evaluation. And they're going to see a timer that is counting down the whole time that they are working on your form. The next option here says auto close form when time is over. If you select this, then when that timer is up, the form responses will not be accepted anymore. And so this does kind of the same thing that form limiter does. And I generally don't like to accept this because you can stop accepting responses whenever you want, or you can use form limiter to achieve that. If you don't select this, it will let students know when the timer's up and it'll allow them to go over time, but that's something that you can see in the summary. And you may want to do that just so that if students are working to the very last second, that they don't get their whole form thrown out. And you can have a hard limit set with form limiter or shut off the responses yourself. Then the last option here, because these two middle ones are not available for us, the last option here says allow to view quiz score and results after submission. This is something that you only want to check if every part of your quiz is automatically graded by Google, because the quiz score that it's going to put there is what it gets from the Google form for what was able to be automatically graded. So if you're manually grading your quiz, or if you have manually graded questions, you do not want to have this option selected, because if you do, students are going to be seeing a quiz score that isn't correct, because it's not going to be including the scores that you need to manually grade. So once I have the options relevant to whatever type of evaluation I'm doing, I press create. And you can see now that the test that I just created is in this first row. Now I only have one there because I just sent it to my email. But if you had sent this to all of the students in a particular section, for example, you would see all of their emails here. And next to that, you'd see a bunch of options here that says copy URL. This URL is unique, and that's what sends them to their particular test. Now, at the top of our dashboard here, you see an option that says send tests and one that says public form link. If I were to press send test, then I could select all of the students that I added to this test that I created. I could send the test to all of them at once, and it would send a link to their email account where they could then enter and complete the evaluation. However, this is something that is a premium option. And with the free version, you can only do that 100 times. So you can see that I'm already down to 98 for doing that. Similarly, the public form link, this would be a link that you could post in Google Classroom. And if I were to do that, then students would be able to click on that link and go to the form that you created for them. However, again, this option also takes away from that quota. But this option that says copy URL next to the test that I just created, this does not take away from your quota. It's free and you can do it as many times as you want to. So there are a couple ways to get around this problem. And what one teacher from high school, Marseille, told me was that she created a document that had all of the students' names in that document. And below their names, she copied the URL and placed it beneath. And so that document she could then share through Google Classroom, and students could enter the document, click on the link, and complete the evaluation. So when students press on this link, what they're going to see, if I paste this in my browser, is the name of the evaluation and how much time they have to complete it. And if they press open the form, you're going to see that there's a timer up here that starts counting down the second that I click on that link. Then students can complete the form and submit it. And if you are allowing them to go overtime, as they get into the last couple of minutes of the evaluation, this bar is going to turn red, and it's going to warn them that they need to submit it. And once they go past that time, it's going to say that they are overtime, unless you selected the option where it automatically closes, in which case, once the time runs out, the form closes and they lose their progress if they have not submitted it. Once all of your students have submitted their forms, you're going to see all of the responses down here. So you can see a couple ones that I tested out myself, which is something that you guys are going to need to do in the activity for this session. So you're going to see a couple of things here. First is these colors on the left-hand side. If it's green, that means that students submitted it in the amount of time that they were given. If it's red, then that means that I had that option selected where it was going to close if they didn't complete it on time. And so the red means the time was over and there was nothing submitted. If it is yellow, then that means that they went overtime. And down here, it will let you know how far overtime they went. Then one other great feature that another teacher, Vero, told me from high school is that if you see here, there's this thing that says unfocused one time, or always in focus. What that tells you is if students left your form while they were completing it. Meaning, if students open another tab, if they open another window, if they go to another application, it will let you know how many times they did that, which is another way to help mitigate cheating. And lastly, you can see that there's a score here, but that score Timify gets from the questions that Google Forms was able to grade automatically. So if you are manually grading that, this score, as I mentioned before, is not going to be accurate. It's only going to be accurate if all of the questions in your form were questions that Google Forms could grade. Now we need to talk about grading. So if I go back to my form and I go to responses and I press on individual, I can go through each of the individual submissions that I received. Now you can see right here that it says that the score has not been released. And it says that because I set this quiz up for the scores not to be released until each of the quizzes have been manually reviewed. And so if I had set this quiz up so that the scores were immediately released, then I would not have this option. But now I can grade every one of the quizzes before I release those scores to students. And when I want to do that, if I press this button, I can decide whether I want to release that score to one student or to release it to the entire class at once. And it'll send an email with their submission reports. Now, as far as the questions go, if you remember, I had a number of questions that were automatically graded. So I have the multiple choice, which when I did this, I got correct. So Google can grade that 1 out of 1. Same thing with this checkbox, I got everything correct and Google was able to grade that. But remember with checkbox versus multiple choice that everything needs to be correct in a row. If you were to get one of these correct, Google is still going to mark it as wrong. So you have to keep that in mind, and that might be something you need to go back and manually change the score. If I had set this for 2 points, I could then have a 1 out of 2, for example. But you would need to do that. Then for the multiple choice grid, same thing, got some right, got some wrong. And for this last checkbox question, I made this out of 2 and I got both of these right. But remember, if students had gotten one of these but not the other, this would still say 0 out of 2. Google can't differentiate that. So that's something that you would need to go back and manually review and put 1 out of 2 if they got one but not the other. And then for the short answer questions, for this one, for example, Google marked this as wrong because it wasn't something that it could grade. But if you look at this question, there were 3 different things I asked there. 2 examples of the artist's famous works and the name of the artist. For the answer, I put the name of the artist. So when I manually review this, I could change that from a 0 to a 1. And once I do that, I need to press save because it says edits are pending. And for that final question, I had Google grade this and I had 4 different variations that I wrote. In this case, I got it correct. But remember that these are dangerous because you need to have in the answers every variation that you can think of that students might answer. And so Google was able to grade this because that response was one of the ones that I put, but that can include upper and lowercase or spelling errors, so it can be a little more tricky to try to use this type of question as being something that is automatically graded. And once I'm done with everything and I've graded all of the tests, I can release the scores to students. And now I'm going to show you how to incorporate one of these quizzes into Google Classroom so that the grades that you put here, once you release them, you can import into Google Classroom and not have to enter those numbers in manually. So now if I go to Google Classroom, I press create and I create an assignment and I add that form that we were just working on. When I select it, you're going to see that there's this option down here that says grade importing. And if I have this selected for a Google form here, then once in the form that I release the scores, Google is going to be able to import those grades into Classroom. And that will go into the gradebook for Classroom. However, one thing to keep in mind is that if you are using Timify.me, remember that you are using those unique URLs for each student, and you do not want them to go through this link to do that form. And so if you're using Timify.me, but you want the grades to be imported to Classroom, then you need to create this assignment after the fact, and Google will be able to import each of those grades for the students. If you want to know more about this process, I have another tutorial where I go more in depth as to how this can be achieved, and I provide examples of how to do that. So now that we have gone through each of the steps relevant to creating an effective evaluation using Google Forms, now I have an activity that I want you guys to do to show me that you understand this process and you're able to get through each one of these steps yourselves. So you can see here in activity instructions, I want you to create your own evaluation. Now, if you want to, you can use some of the examples that are inside the folder that I shared with you down here through this link. But I want you to create an evaluation, and once you have completed that Google form, I want you to add my school email as a collaborator, and the share link for the form should be pasted in the appropriate space below. So the appropriate space would be right here. So that's the share link for your actual Google form. Then I want you to add that form to Timify Me, and I want you to create 2 tests using that form, where you add your own email and you add my email as recipients. The Timify Me URL of the test created for my email should be pasted in the appropriate space below. So down here, paste the URL link that you've created for Timify Me. That's so that I can access it and see if you implemented the timer correctly and see what options you chose. Then, for the link that you created for yourself in Timify Me, I want you to follow that link, complete your own form, your own evaluation, and that's to give you an idea of what a student would see when they're completing a form added to Timify Me. Finally, go back to the Google form in your Google Drive in the same way that I did, and grade the form that you just submitted via Timify Me. Again, some of the questions may be auto-graded, but any questions that are not, you need to manually grade. And once all of this is done and you submitted this form, that way I can check your Timify Me link, and I can also go into your form and see how you graded your form. Anyway, I hope this tutorial was clear. I know that it was long, but if any of this was confusing, or if you want any more information on any of the steps mentioned in this video, if you go to my YouTube channel, I have multiple tutorials on a couple of the steps involved in this process where I go more in depth. And so if you want more help, follow this link and select the relevant tutorial. Regardless, good luck, and if you need help, please let me know, reach out to me, and when you're done with this form, make sure that you submit it, and you let me know if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions.